Alrighty, welcome to Got Johnny Speaks. And right now we're going to talk about extroverted thinking. Okay, and in this series, I'm going to be talking about the thinking types, the thinking dominant types, and starting with extroverted thinking. Um, for those of you who might know, who may not know, there's two forms of the thinking function. We have extroverted thinking and we have introverted thinking. Now, to delve a little bit, to get a little more basic, there's thinking and feeling. Okay, and when anybody that knows MBTI, there's four main functions we're dealing with, which is thinking, your thoughts, feeling, which are your feelings, your emotions, your intuition, which is, as I've explained, it is the simulated version of things in your mind, and then the sensing function, which is literally the things in your environment that you can interact with and touch and taste and things like that, the physical things in your environment, right? Um, so when we talk about these different types and we put the attention on thinking, what we want to first look at is as a sensor or as an intuitive, all that is, these are the functions that take the world in. This is how that's the first thing that happens. You're just looking at things, right? As you look at things, you then process them. This is where we begin to talk about the thinking function and the feeling function. This is related to how we process the world, the meaning that we give to the things we're looking at, the ways that we want to utilize the things that we're looking at. Really, anything that we add on to what we're looking at internally, mentally, that's happening either through us thinking about it, processing it logically, or processing it or experiencing it on a feeling level. So when we talk about extroverted thinking and thinking in general, right? Thinking is all about logic. It's all about making sense of things as they are, making sense of things that we're looking at and perceiving, and organizing them in a way that makes sense or in a way that has usability for people. Like, one person looked at a tree, and over time we've been able to see a tree and use it for a variety of different things. And this has been because of our thinking component. We saw trees and have come up with mechanisms over time, of course, but that we now have tables, houses, everything you can think of, desks, everything that we utilize from wood, right? Let's go even further. How do we get the names for everything we're looking at? It's through thinking. Like, somebody had to think of a name for this thing. So somebody might have seen what we call a tree now and have just seen it as just a big thing coming out the ground, right? And then eventually they said something, they came with the word tree for us to understand what that tree is. So on a fundamental level, we have to understand that thoughts are the fundamental basis behind our ability to name and even know what these things are in our environment. We intuitively or on a sensory level know what they are or what we do with them. But once we begin to speak, once we begin to communicate, tell other people what this is, this now means that we all have to agree to a collective thought. Okay? And that collective thought and those collective thoughts that we bring together over time begins to be the premise that we use our communication for, and the premise behind how we view and see and process the world. So as you can see, there are billions of people on the planet, and there have been billions of people over time contributing their thoughts to the table. And this is how we come up with the overall thoughts about the world, about our jobs, about our families, about our communities. It even goes as deep as religion. It can go into politics. Everything is about group thought versus how we individually think about things. So I say that for a reason, because when we talk about extroverted thinking versus introverted thinking, it kind of goes back to what I just said. Extroverted thinking is our collective group thought on something, right? And our introverted thinking is my thoughts on something. That's one way it can be expressed. Another way to understand extroverted thinking is paying attention to what is in its external environment. That's what it's giving most of its thinking power, or a large portion of its thinking energy to. For example, extroverted thinking is very powerful if we want to come up with something in the real world to help, or something in the real world to build or bring into actuality. This is where the extroverted thinking component is so powerful. Introverted thinking. Introverted thinking, which I'll talk about in my next segment, or the next segment, is that introverted thinking is more so a subjective form of thinking. Now, of course, they're still related to each other because it requires subjective thoughts to penetrate the collective thought and create, this idea that everyone can agree with. But vice versa, it also requires group thought so that individuals can even have a premise on their own thoughts. So you begin to see how both parties work together. Now, to shine the light more on extroverted thinking, we're talking about something that's more applicable to the collective. That also explains why extroverted thinking is more tied to the external world. Because from an extroverted thinking perspective, it's like, who cares when I'm individually thinking, like I'm just one person? Or who cares about how I see how we should build the house? Like, I want to know what the people want. I want to know what's missing in the environment. I want to know what's going on externally, because then that will help me shape my individual thought in a way that's more effective, in a way that's more productive and helpful to the collective. You know what I mean? So that form of logic is what drives extroverted thinking. Extroverted thinking is all about efficiency. Why is it all about efficiency? Because if we understand the axis of extroverted thinking, its axis has introverted feeling on the other side. So you have to imagine that, when it comes to introverted feeling, that's much more of a function that's related to my individuality, how I feel, right? So then when I do put my attention as a extroverted thinking dominant towards the external environment, I want to make sure everything's moving at its optimal level so that as an individual, you can feel more comfortable in the external world. So what drives a lot of extroverted thinking is trying to make things better and more efficient and more improved for the external world, and also for themselves to feel more comfortable. As extroverted thinkers, as extroverted thinking dominant, TE is a function that very much so is all about building on top of what is, or pushing innovation. TE is definitely a function that drives innovation in its own right. People with the TE dominant function are a lot of the time known to be dominators, known to be conquerors, like the ENTJ types. ENFJ types are, I'm sorry, not ENFJ, but ENTJ types and ESTJ types are very much so all about moving forward. What do I have to do? Very duty obligated, but all about doing things at a big level and doing things at a fast level and doing things at a efficient level. TE dominant function, a lot of the time has this thing where it's very antsy. Because unlike introverted thinking, and I've explained this already about how the introverted and extroverted functions are a bit different, in the sense that if you're an introverted dominant, or the introverted functions in general, like to take things more at a linear pace. So I do this, then I do that in order to get that. The extroverted functions are more so spontaneous. They're much more able and apt to deal with chaos, for example. So let's say there was this whole plan to build things in a way that was like perfect. Okay, we're going to do this, this, and that. And then let's say some catastrophe happens to the business. A big hurricane knocks down its big power plant or whatever, right? For example, this is where TE becomes so important or so valuable, because the TE is all about, okay, what do we have to do to get things done now, or to keep things moving, regardless of what's being thrown at it. Extroverted thinking is all about being able to deal with spontaneity, being fast responsive, coming up with quick ideas. People with TE dominant functions can pull from logic out very quickly. If you ask them a question, they can give you answers very quickly. They can respond to things very quickly, because essentially TE people value themselves on the ability to be intelligent and to be proficient and productive in a span of time that's quick, in a span of time that they can respond to anything. That is the power of TE. You know, extroverted thinking is predicated on the external world. So that means that a lot of the things that TE is focused on is about what's going on in the outside environment. So what that means is they are the types that are very good at management positions or positions where they're managing people or large things outside of themselves, because they have the wherewithal to be like, hey guys, you got to go do things this way, or hey, we got to move this here. It's very much so focused on what's going on outside. Okay. And because of that, it is paying a lot of attention and noticing the nuances of what needs to be done externally. And because of that, it's an amazing function when it comes to solving things in the external environment, when it comes to finding mediums and ways in which people can meet, and really in ways in which optimization can be done in a balanced way, because TE has the ability to focus on many different aspects of the external environment at one time. So that gives them a very great level of insight when it comes to providing perspective on how things should be done externally in the external world. And you'll find out a lot of TE people, dominant people, have a lot of perspective, on the things going on in the outside world. Now, with that being said, before I do the pros and cons, the last thing I'll say about TE is an absorber of information. The way TE mainly gains its information is like being a sponge and soaking up everything in its external environment. It feeds off of the information that they learn from people, the information from textbooks or information online or information anywhere. TE wants that information. They value information, and they especially value information that will allow them to have more power or production or progression or help them in their company or their pursuits become greater. That's their main goal in the sense of getting so much information. So what you'll find from a lot of TE people, they'll have tons of knowledge about a variety of different subjects, and because of that, they have a lot to contribute to the conversation. Because TE is all about being proficient, all about being efficient, and all about knowing what's going on in a variety of different areas. It's just generally knowing what's going on. So when we talk about TE now, the pros and cons, let's first talk about the pros. TE is very bold. It's a very strong function in the sense that it will let the outside world know what it thinks, because it will let you know that what I'm thinking is based on something that's real. So TE is very valid in that sense, is that its knowledge base and information is predicated and backed by real facts, real things going on in the world, things that you can see with your eyes happening in the environment. So because of that, and because of its focus on the outer world, it's hard to really argue or counter a lot of extroverted thinking dominant types or people with TE in their stack, in the sense that the information or the validity that they're bringing you is based on what's happening in the outer world. So they're all about proof. They're all about validity and all about seeing things in the outside world as they are. Another great thing about TE is extremely efficient. TE people are always thinking fast, trying to think of ways they can do things better. So let's say you got to get something done. Like I explained earlier, let's say there's a crisis, or on a more regular level, let's just say you're on a deadline or a crunch. TE has the ability to say, all right, look, here's what we got